my name is Sonja Lyubomirsky, and I'm a professor of psychology at the University of California, Riverside, and I've been doing research on happiness for 24 years, so almost a quarter of a century. When I first started doing research on happiness, it was considered kind of a fuzzy, unscientific topic. Very few people were doing it. But now it's a huge field. There are neuroscientists studying happiness. There's a whole area of economics that's devoted to happiness. And so mostly what I do is I do what are called happiness interventions. So those are kind of like clinical trials, but instead of testing a new treatment or a new drug, we're testing different happiness strategies to see what makes people happier. And then we follow them across time. So these are all experiments. And pretty early on, people kept asking me, well, why don't you write a book about happiness? And I thought, I don't really know enough, there's not enough science on it. But then eventually I decided there was enough research, and I wrote The How of Happiness, and that was in 2008. And then I just came up with kind of a follow-up, sort of a follow-up, not really a sequel, called The Myths of Happiness. First book, people kept saying you should write a book, and I definitely agreed that us scientists, we write for each other. We publish in scholarly journals that only we read. And then there's all these self-help gurus out there who write their opinions. And some of the opinions are wise and some are not, but it's hard to tell the difference. And so I did think it was very important to sort of translate the science for the lay audience, for the public. And so that's what I did with The How of Happiness. And then the second book happened, I don't know, kind of serendipitously. There's a lot of research that I thought I didn't really cover in the first one. I was really interested in this idea that many people have the wrong idea about what makes them happy and what might make them unhappy. And I wanted to cover different domains in life: marriage, money, work, aging, health, kids. So kind of wanted to cover the gamut. So that happened, I don't know, a little bit more serendipitously. There's sort of a balance between, well, this book is based on science, but then it has to be accessible. So I'm not going to go into the details of my statistics. But fortunately, the research on happiness is pretty easy to understand. It doesn't really require high-level kind of knowledge. And I think I'm pretty good at translating it for the public. I do use examples from my own life, and I sometimes interview people. I use stories from real people. But mostly it's about the research, and the examples are there more to illustrate. It's interesting because sometimes I'm asked, well, why don't you put more of yourself in your book? Why isn't it more about you? And a lot of people say that they like those parts. And I just feel like, as a scientist, that's not my job. My job is to be objective. If you have a strong opinion or preconception about happiness, what makes people happy, about what people believe about happiness, that can influence the findings of your research. And so I really try hard to keep my preconceptions and prejudgments and opinions out of my work. I'm generally a happy person, and people who are kind of naturally happy, they don't really need to read books about happiness because they kind of already have the habits. On the other hand, there are lots of things that I could do more of. So here's one example that I've learned from my research or from my writing, which is the importance of sort of living more in the present, being more in the moment, savoring the moment. There's quite a bit of research on that and how that increases happiness and joy. And so that's influenced me, that in my own life, I try to remind myself, like when I'm with my kids, focus on the moment. Don't think about tomorrow. And the research on relationships, I think, has influenced me because relationships are so critical to happiness. Basically, anything you can do to improve your relationships is going to improve your happiness. And so one thing I write about in The Myths of Happiness is, if every day you ask yourself, what can I do for 5 minutes today to make my partner or my friend or my family members happier? So that has influenced me because I remember writing my chapter on relationships from the first book, The How of Happiness, and it made me kind of do things for my husband. I use basically the definition of happiness that researchers use, which is that happiness really has two components. And by the way, I really believe this for me personally as well as what I use in science. So happiness really has two components. And the first component is a sense that your life is good. Having that judgment that you're satisfied with your life, you're content with the way you're progressing towards your life's goals. And the second component is the experience of positive emotions, a lot more than negative emotions. So joy, pride, curiosity, affection, tranquility, So that's important too. And the way that I explain it in my own life is that, when I had my first two little kids, when they were very, very small, I was very, very high on the kind of the satisfaction with life component. I thought, oh, this is exactly where I want it to be. I've achieved my life's goals, but I was very low on the emotion component. There's a lot of a lot of stress and a lot of negative emotions. But you have to have both to be happy. And then another example I use, I'm a professor, so with college students, sometimes you see college students who are partying a lot, and they might have a girlfriend, and they're having a lot of fun, a lot of positive emotions, but they don't really know what they're doing in life. They don't really know where they're going. They don't even know what to major in. They're kind of floundering. So they have the positive emotion component, but they don't have the satisfaction with life component. So you really need both of those to be a truly happy person. I get so many emails, and just people come up to me and they'll tell me, "Oh, your book, changed my life," which is amazing. I kind of feel it's a little bit hard to believe for me, but I hear that quite often, and often it's people who have been going through hard times, and they just sort of turn themselves around, because this is a cliche, but happiness is really on the inside, not on the outside. So even people facing adversity. So I've heard from a guy who has AIDS, or a guy who has a very sick child. I've heard from people who've been through lots of relationship problems, illness, mental health, a lot of depressed individuals, suicidal individuals. And so they kind of feel like, well, now they know that there's sort of things that they can do to be happy. And because one of the themes of my first book, The How of Happiness, is that you have to kind of find the right strategy for you. And because a lot of other books about happiness don't emphasize that. They'll just say, do this. You should count your blessings. It's not for everyone. Some people find that so hokey, it just doesn't work for them. And I say, that's fine. If that doesn't work for you, don't do it. I'm trying to think of particular examples, just really, amazing stories. People write me these really, really long emails about sort of everything that went on in their life, and sort of how it's changed them. And some people have even started blogging. They've started kind of new ventures. I do a lot of research on kindness, and how doing acts of kindness can make people happier. And there's quite a few people who've contacted me, and they've said they've started kind of sort of new kind of projects where you get people to pay it forward, pay acts of kindness forward, or like acts of kindness day, that kind of thing. So that's really gratifying. And then with my recent book, The Myths of Happiness, I talk about sex in the book. And so that's inspired a lot of response. And so I published this article in the New York Times about the decline of passion in marriage. And so I talked about how that's very normal, that there's a process called hedonic adaptation, which is basically that we adapt very quickly to positive changes in our lives, and we seek variety and novelty when it comes to sex. And women actually want more novelty than men do. So I've gotten so much response to that. So for example, a sex therapist emailed me, and she said, "Oh, I'm so glad you talked about this. I see a lot of women with sort of low libido, and they feel, and their partners feel, other people feel there's something wrong with them." And she said, "There's nothing wrong with them. They're just, they just want more novelty. They're just kind of they're bored with their partners." So that was kind of interesting. So I get kind of interesting insights from different people. God, I don't know where I'm going next. That's a really hard question. My lab is involved in lots of really exciting research projects. So we just finished a project in Madrid, Spain. And we do a lot of cross-cultural projects. So I think that's definitely on the horizon. That's a really important topic, looking at the pursuit of happiness in different cultures. So we just did a study in a company in Madrid where we asked people to do acts of kindness in the workplace, and it sort of transformed the whole workplace. Everyone started doing more positive behaviors, more acts of kindness for one another. Not just people who we asked to do that, but people who received the acts of kindness. And even if you're sort of close to someone who was a generous person, you started maybe you were inspired by them. So that was really exciting. So that's about kind of the propagation of happiness and the propagation of kindness in an environment. So we're interested in doing that. One direction for us is looking at actual human behavior. For example, we've done studies where we have people wear badges, these RFID badges that sense one another, so we can see if, for example, if you try to be more grateful, do you interact with more people? And also they measure physical activity. Do you have more energy? Do you move more when you're happier? So that's a really cool direction for our lab. And we've done some studies with kids now, which is also really new. So we just did an experiment in Vancouver where we asked fourth, fifth, and sixth graders to do acts of kindness over a period of a month. And not only did they get happier, but they became more popular with their peers. So we asked all the classmates in every class to tell us who they liked and who they wanted to spend time with, do activities with. So that's a really cool direction. So, and we're now doing a lot of work on sort of not only how does gratitude or kindness or optimism, how does that increase happiness, but how does it also lead you to maybe improve yourself in other ways as well. So I'm interested in studying kind of self-improvement in general, not just self-improvement in terms of how you feel, but being sort of being a better person. Interesting question about sort of where ideas come from, because in truth they come from so many different places. I mean, sometimes it's I might read a newspaper article and I don't know, learn something and think, oh, that I should study that, or it could come from an anecdote from real life. Often ideas come from kind of, we do one study, we find something, and then and that raises more questions, and then we follow it up. And then finally, actually, this happens a lot, where I get contacted by people and they say, oh, I'm the warden of a prison, and I'd love for you to do a study with the prisoners. Now, and I actually have been asked to do that. I haven't done it yet. And then they'll have some ideas, and then we might have ideas. Oh, what do we do with prisoners? So for example, we just published the paper I just talked about kids who did acts of kindness that became more popular. So a colleague mentioned that they were interested in us doing that study, sort of replicating that study, maybe with individuals who are ill or undergoing some kind of negative experiences, but also comparing doing acts of kindness for others as opposed to yourself. So because there's some counterintuitive findings in the literature that, like, if you spend money on others versus yourself, you actually feel better when you spend money on others. It's a little counterintuitive because you think, well, wouldn't I rather spend the money on myself? So if I do three nice things for someone else versus 3 nice things for myself, what makes me happier? So I think we're going to do that study. So that kind of came from someone else, but it was in a reaction to what we did. So it's really fun to be a scientist because you can do whatever you want in a sense. And as I said, ideas can come from so many different places. So my career in general has involved, doing research, working with students and teaching both undergraduate and graduate students. And also more recently, kind of communicating with the public about my work. And so one thing I've learned about myself is I like to translate the science to sort of into accessible language. And I enjoy kind of giving talks in different places. Actually, I enjoy traveling. I've been able to travel all over the world, sort of giving talks in different countries, Turkey, Spain, lots of places, Singapore. So I've learned that about myself, that I really like doing that. I would never have predicted a long time ago that's what I would be doing. And another thing I learned about myself is that I really like working with graduate students, working with other people. So science is a very much of a kind of a group-based, interdependent endeavor. You don't generally sort of do it yourself. And maybe if you're a theoretical mathematician or something like that, but generally you're working with many others, and that's really, really fun. And also have discovered about myself that I'm really kind of a perfectionist when it comes to writing. So I spend a lot of time editing and kind of changing words and sentences around. I really love language. English is not my first language. And so I think that maybe that has made me, I don't know, kind of pay more attention to language.